Good evening and welcome to the video. Today I will try to explain how to create free targeting spells and how do you make units dash short distances with a minimal targeting feature. The core of this revolves around two game effects, launch projectile and persistent, and I have made a list of the important parts, along with an optional elements to tailor it the way you want it to interact. Note that if you want it to launch the unit itself, you will need the elements marked in green, and if you want to launch a projectile spell, like the tsunami or fire wave spell, you will need the purple marked content respectively. And I will preface this by saying that the ability iteration of unit stashing so far have largely failed, but I will showcase what I have made so far. And before we go on, I want to point out the favorite feature in the editor, which will let you put stuff you frequently use to the top, so you do not have to go through the entire list of things that you might not necessarily use frequently, so that you can work faster. And I previously mentioned that I had to discard previous maps because they would not launch from testing. The editor would not freeze or force cancel, it simply would not let me test the actual map. I discovered that if you have an ability in the unit's ability list or command list and delete the ability itself, then without removing it from the unit, you will get a red triangle here. Let me show you how that the map currently works. As you can see, it currently works perfectly fine without any problems. And now I will delete the ability and test the map. The map simply will not progress, that's the issue. It does not crash, freeze or force close. And now if I remove the abilities from the unit's ability list and command list, it should work again. Here you can see the red triangle. And now let's test it to see if it works. And there, solved. If you have the same problem, then a leftover deleted ability in the abilities command list or ability list of a unit could be what's causing the problem for the editor. Now to start it off, I will create a projectile spell to make a projectile float across the battlefield and explain the respective elements in detail. Starting off with the launch projectile, I will set the impact and launch locations. I've tried launching spells and weapons using projectile and sending units themselves flying. These two can be copy-pasted across all spells and weapons that will be made. And the impact and the movement speed, this will determine how fast it will be going, and if you want to have a catapult effect, for instance, you will be enabling lob here. And a projectile will be necessary. This will be the model for the projectile itself. The spell will work without it, but it will be instantly sent flying to the target without having a model. And now for stage ability. To test this off, I will have stage ability with simply having the game effect to the launch unit to test that we have things going properly now, and I will be setting the range to 20. With the current testing of the spell, I can cast it anywhere within a range 20 of the 20 of the unit. Any further and it will cause the unit to walk towards it. This is what an ordinary spell looks like when you've set it to be able to cast the ground anywhere. And now let's try to add a max range to the formula, with a max range of 15. And add an lob catapult trajectory effect as well with a value of 15, in order to see how these two factors will affect the spell. And I forgot to set something here previously as well. Setting specifically to location so that it will not accidentally track a unit. Now I can cast it at a range up to 20, but as you can see, the range does not go as far as I target. Every black dot here represents a range of 5, and my spell's range is effectively limited to the range max value. We now have a max distance, and now let's go into the topic of the video, creating a minimum targeting range. Now for the content of the persistent. All of the red fields here can be copied over to all iterations of what will be created in this video. Well, only the offset's initial should be customized, and finding the previously created game effect launch projectile that you've made. With the way the persistent has been made here, your unit will cast its spell only to the effect location, which is the center of your unit. And now I will set the offset to radius 5, and it will only offset to a radius of 5 away from the effect location, which is the caster unit. And setting the initial here, which is the launch unit, the launch projectile. And now let's see how the ability the ability's cast game effect to persistent and see how it behaves differently. Now as I try to cast the spell, it will have a fixed distance at a range of 5, as is set by the persistence offset value. Now let's set the offset radius to 20. And the staged ability is cast range to 30. Set the lob value to 60. Add a skill shot. And a damage value in its effect slot. Make sure that it does not cause friendly fire. And set the width to 3. Now the spell will in theory have a minimum targeting range of 20, but it will still be hard limited by the launch projectile's max range of 15. But it will now cast a fireball, which will deal damage to enemies that comes into contact with it. Now let's see how it works. As you can see, now the spell will target toward a radius of 15, regardless of how far I cast the spell. And a little explanation of the skill shot. The skill shot's contact point is not determined by the radius of the model itself, but its position on the map. The projectile's model with a lob will be way over the gremlin in its path, but when I target behind the gremlin, it will still hit it. The skill shot's ground coordinates and width determines what targets will be hit. Altitude is not a factor. If you wanted to only deal damage to air or ground targets, then you will have to determine so with the targeting filter, and height ground for exclusively ground and height air for exclusively air. Here's a height plane air and height plane ground. And now let's remove the lob effect and see how it works in practice. And now we have a fireball ability that is launched at a fixed range, or with a minimum targeting range from your spellcaster, which can only attack a ground unit. And now a hybrid alternative for those who want it, and minimum targeting range and with the freedom to cast further. And game effect switch and a validator is needed. For the switch I would have one case where the action will be the persistent and the default action will be a launch projectile. And I will set the persistence offset to a distance of 5 to determine the minimum range that the spell will have. Now for the validator, it will be surprisingly simple. First is a logic parameter, followed by an less than or equal number. For the core question, I will set it to get the distance between 2 points. The origin of will be the function call get the caster point, and the target function will be a function call get the function call target point. And lastly, I will set the distance to 5, same as the persistent and same as the persistence offset radius. Now this validator will be true if the distance between the caster and the target is less than 5. And I will quickly set the staged abilities new gamecast effect to the switch and back to the switch. Now with the switch case condition will be the previously created validator. Now when you cast the ability in the game, the first thing it will ask is if the distance between the caster and the point is 5 or less. If this is true, then it will use the persistent, which will cast at the offset distance of 5 from the caster. If the target is further, then it will use the default action, which is the launch projectile, which you can use as far as the projectile's max ranges or the staged ability's max ranges. Now let's test it. And here it is, a spell with a minimum targeting range, with the freedom to cast further from the caster and not too close. Hopefully this will give you some ideas of your own. Now let's go off and create a weapon iteration of this with a minimum range. Next I will do the same with a weapon firing and a projectile. First impact location and launch location, which will be the same as the previous thing. And setting the movement to 15 and applying a model which is necessary. And let's see. And now apply it to a weapon. And now let's see what it looks like. And now we have a weapon which will target the ground of the unit instead of homing in on the unit itself. Now let's add a minimum targeting range. Now one persistent with the same setting as previously. Applying the launch projectile first. And the location will be the point of the source. And the offset will be 5 away from the target, from the caster, and setting the start to the source. Now when I apply this to the weapon, it will target a ground distance of 5 away from the caster, from the unit that's firing the weapon, instead of the maximum range. Even if the max is 5, the max will still be determined by the persistence offset. Now let's give it a shot and test it. Now as you can see, it will fire its projectile in front of itself at a limit of the persistence offset radius. Now let's increase its range and set an periodic effect to the weapon. First on damage radius with a radius of 3 and dealing 1 damage per tick. Setting it to a full damage within a radius of 3 and removing the friendly fire filters, or applying to make sure that it does not damage any friendly entities. And for testing purposes, I'm removing the damage response to make sure that they don't move away from the area. And now for the launch projectile. Expanding the periodic, setting the previous damage radius, and I will have it pulse every 0.1 second. So every 0.2 second that enemy is within a range of 3 of the projectile, it will deal the damage radius to it. And I'm not adding a skill shot to this, so there will be no contact damage with it, only pulsing damage. And when I'm at it, I'll be setting on max range to 15. This is not necessary because I'm also setting the persistence the offset to 25, and I'm setting the weapon's max range to only 20. But remember that and the weapon's max range is 20, but this is only how close you have to get in order to fire the weapon. The persistence will determine, and the max travel range will determine how far the projectile can travel. Now let's test the weapon. Also, I just want to point out that the weapon acquisition range, I think, which is by default set to 3, is what determines the aggro range, which is why it does not attack units by itself. But now let's test. Now as you can see, it will deal pulsing damage to enemies that are close enough to the projectile. Next up, creating a dash ability by launching the unit itself. I will admit ahead of time, after extensive testing, I have come to the conclusion that I have failed to create a ground version of dashing with spells and weapons. Being unable to find a solid way to prevent the unit from flying up and down and through cliffs, but I will present what I have made so far. As previously, creating a launch projectile by applying point target to impact and point source to launch. Now, however, as this intends to launch the unit, we will need anim montage and fallback unit instead of a projectile. Currently I'm trusting most War's dark speed ability and the fallback to caster. I just had to check something quickly. And now we'll set the movement to what is desired, 15 in this case. And I will not have any lob effect. Now to apply it to a staged ability and setting to launch projectile. And I will setting the casting range of this to 10 and the target location so that I do not accidentally, in order to prevent it from accidentally targeting tracking units, and setting an unreal component to. This is the only one that I found that works so far, and I'll just quickly check that I've done something correct there. Yes, that's correct. And now to apply it to an unit quickly and let's test it. And now let's test it. And now we have the basis for sending a unit from one location to another. As I mentioned, that I have failed in my ultimate goal in creating what I wanted, which was a dash ability. But as I was reading through my script, I realized that others may not want a dash, but a leap ability that can go up and down cliffs. The only step in the refinement is to prevent the unit from jumping into the middle of the cliff like this. Fortunately for that, there is a solution for that, with a validator. For the validator, it is straightforward. On a function call with the call question, location is pathable. Then set a location to function call and the vector target point. Now where I'm trying to cast the ability, it will check if a unit is able to walk there. Then applying it to the launch projectile and the validator here. Since the launch projectile is the direct connection to the ability, this will effectively operate as the ability's validator to check if I can cast it or not. And so I'll set the movement to a lob effect with a value of 60 in order to have a little bit of a leap animation, and I'm gonna have to fix one thing as well. I set the animation to a wrong parameter. I should instead have used it as a base ability cast animation. This will give a small animation component to the spell. Now let's test it out. And there we have it. A leap ability that cannot target cliffs. It looks a little bit janky, but at the very least we have the leap ability now that can go up and down cliffs. Now back to the failed attempt at creating a dash ability. Now I've altered back the previous changes to make a leap ability, and let's go with the persistent to create a dash ability. First I will set the initial to launch projectile, and then setting the effect location to point and source. Then setting offset start vector to the source, and then setting the offset to a radius of 5. Now to set the staged ability's new game cast effect to the persistent. Is this the correct one? This is the correct one. And let's make it a little bit more special by going into the flags. With the preempt option, what this will do is to allow you to set a spell into the cube without interrupting other orders, such as for instance movement. Now let's see how things work out in practice. Now I have an ability with a minimum targeting range that if I for instance do not want to accidentally waste mana or a cooldown by panic casting it next to the caster. And it will be less intrusive in that it will not interrupt other orders, like when you're walking for instance. I've been able to find a solid way to prevent something, however. The spell sending the unit up or through cliffs. I have removed the validator that prevents me from targeting cliffs, but that will not prevent it anyway, just for reference. And I've tried to create 2 alternatives, but both have had limited success, and here they are. The first will be an alternative to prevent you from traveling to a different cliff level. For the first step, we will need an logic parameter followed by equal to. The left parameter there will be a function called with an get cliff height of location, which will be followed by a function called target point. This will check what is the point that I am trying to cast the spell at. The right side will be another function call with the same get cliff height of location. This time we'll be having, however, a function called with a position of entity, and the entity will be the function called entity source. This will compare the target I'm trying to cast to what is the cliff height of the unit I'm casting with. Now let's stick the validator onto the persistent to see what happens. Success! We can no longer target a spell up the cliff, but we can still cast next to it. Placing the validator on the staged ability's direct cast game effect content will prevent me from casting it up or down different cliff levels, but the following content of the persistent is not blocked. There is a step that will partially remedy this by placing it on a launch projectile as well. In the launch missile there is a validator slot, which I can stick the previously created validator in. Now let's see what happens. Now we have a partial success as mentioned. While I cannot launch myself up the cliff, this spell is technically still casted. The persistent is casted, but the subsequent launch projectile fails independently. You can tell because of the spent energy of the lancer. And another factor, I can still cast it through walls, but I got an imperfect solution for that as well. In the launch projectile section, I noticed something. Beneath validator is validator chase. What this does is that it can create a potential scenario where the launch projectile can collide and end. So I tried to set in the previous validator to check a different cliff level, but that was a failure. The unit is launched and does detect the cliff difference, but only when it has reached the upper level. Now for the new validator, where I will check for terrain which the ground unit cannot walk through. For this I will need logic as a top parameter, as well as an AND parameter to effectively add two validators in one, since I can only place one in the launch projectile parameter. And here, for the most part, two identical validators, except from I have not set the offset on the second portion, which I will explain. This will ask the core question, if the location is pathable, meaning that your ground units can walk there. Examples of where you cannot walk is in deep water, cliff walls and on the edge of ramps, as well as in deep cliff terrains where units are not supposed to walk. Now I've set the location to position with an offset, so that the following question, where is the position of the entity being yourself, it's not where is this placed, but where is the location offset right next to it, which will be a distance of 0.8 away from it. So it will ask the question if the location next to it is pathable. And to explain why, I will again point out that I've made the subsequent ones without any offset values so you can see how it works. And I will quickly set it to the launch projectiles chase validator to wall contact. Now let's see how this works. Also, I will remove two validators here, both of these that are trying to prevent me from casting the spell up cliff from both the launch projectile and the validator, from the launch projectile and persistent, sorry. Now as you see, the units will likely stop at the wall, and I believe it is this one and this one will be the one that will collide at the wall, and these two here will be far more likely to jump through it. Now let's see. As you can see now, it is stopping at the wall. It's not perfect, but now this one. As you can see, this one is stopping as well. Now you. As you can see, this one is more likely to go through, and this one as well. These two in these directions here, it does not have the check position with offset, so that is why these are more likely to jump through the wall. And now to set the other value. These one have a positive value, so now I will do the same here, except I will set them to a negative value. Also again, remember 0.8, not 0.8. If you use a comma, then it will not work properly. And now it almost works, with one problem. If you go too close to the cliff edge, then your units will no longer technically be impeded from dashing through it, because technically it is not within a 0.8 distance away from it, but closer, which is not covered by the validator. If I try to cast the dash multiple times in the same direction through it, then eventually you will jump through it. As you can see. This is the best I could do, but unfortunately I lack the coding experience to make anything better. If they add on more specific validator parameter to specifically check for cliff walls, then or if someone programs something smarter than me, then hopefully someone will find a better alternative in the future. But this is the best I can make. But I've had some more success with dashing unit with the weapon option. Let's go and check with that. And now for how to create a weapon alternative that causes the weapon to fire the unit itself. First with the launch projectile effects, having the necessary elements. And a montage and fallback unit first. And setting this to caster. Then next is impact location and location both to point, and setting the launch location to the source. Then I'll set the movement to 215, and I will wait with setting up the validators until later. I will showcase what things look like without them. And setting up the persistent to have a minimum range. And setting the offset, I will set this to 10, I believe it was. to 10 and setting this to the source. Actually, I'm checking through my detail again. This was supposed to be 15 for testing purposes. And now to assemble the weapon. And I'll set the range to 10. Oops, again, sorry, it was supposed to be 15. And I'll make sure that I set it to land cell. Now let's see what we have. And there you have it. And so far at the very least, a functional weapon that dashes the unit at a fixed location. Now let's dissect what's wrong with it. The first thing first, it will potentially target units that are on different cliff level and attack through it, which is not something I wanted. And it's gonna potentially get units stuck onto an elevated position if it, for instance, kills the unit that is down here. So then, I have two things I want to fix. Try to avoid having it target units that are up on a cliff, and try to prevent units from jumping up and down cliffs. Now let's see what we can do. And now, as I was thinking about solution, I remembered something. The weapon flag melee. This should in theory prevent you from being able to target entities on different cliffs, so let's enable that. And I will do the same to the Pit Fiend's custom weapon as well. And now let's see how things work. Now when testing it, you will see something odd in that the unit will not go around as it should in theory. Now let's do the Pit Fiend and see what they do. What is that? They go about to the same location with the weapon and attack up the cliff despite the weapon having a melee tag. What is actually happening here is that the melee tag does not actually check if they are on a different cliff level, but on how far they are from a walking distance apart from each other. In practice, if both of these units were next to each other on the same cliff level, and there was a ledge between them, let's see, what the hell are they? Then they would still measure the travel distance between each other instead of checking a cliff. Here you will have units that are absolutely within this distance of 15 from each other, but not from a walking perspective. Now they are attacking each other, and as you can see, they will go around till they get within a walking distance of 15 from each other. I'm sure that they never had in mind that someone would use the melee tag for a weapon within a range 15, seeing as the Incarnate, one of the largest units in the game, only has a melee range of 1.5, but there you have it. Now hopefully at the very least you understand how the melee flag affects the weapon. Now for actually adding a cliff checker validator and apply that to a weapon. Now I will apply a validator that checks if the unit and the target is on the same cliff level on a persistent. And I will remove the melee tag from the weapon. Since the persistent is the direct connection to the weapon fire here, it will effectively add operate as a validator for the weapon, and to prevent it from being fired up and down cliffs. Now let's see how it works. As you can see, the unit will not be able to attack up cliffs, but it will stop in its tracks because it cannot perform its attacks. It is not flawless, but it's one way to prevent you from attacking units that are on a different cliff level. And they will now also be able to dash over cliffs as a result of not having the melee flag. In order to have something like this work properly in the future, we will ideally need a reworked melee tag. I was thinking about it, and quite frankly, I really like the idea of what the melee flag currently offers. This is what would have been needed to, for instance, create the StarCraft reverse attack that sends scarabs to a set walking distance away from itself. Or if we want to have an charging melee unit. You do not want you want the walking distance from it, not a direct line of how far they are away apart from each other. The current melee tag is a fantastic thing. It just does not currently offer what is advertised. And now onward with creating the melee dash weapon. Now I will apply the validator chase and find the wall contact validator that I made earlier. This will check in the nearby vicinity of the unit if there is unpathable terrain there. While not perfect, it will hopefully make it a little bit better. And I will go into the weapon and re-enable the melee flag. And I will set where's the range? This down to 2.5. Actually, I'll send it to 2.4. And now this will only be the distance that it will need to start its weapon. The persistence still determines how far the unit will travel. This is just how close the unit has to get in order to start launching itself. Now let's see what's happened. Now with a weapon range of 4, it is much more in line with what you would expect from a melee weapon and becoming far less problematic. And it has a far less likelihood of crashing through cliff levels, but not entirely. You will not notice it when the unit is attacking away from the wall, but when you're attacking against it, there is much more likelihood for trouble to occur. When attacking against the wall, there is still a possible chance that the unit will micro leap through it and potentially go through the cliff. As you can see here. But this again is only when you're attacking against the wall and not away from it. But the odds of this occurring is drastically less likely when using a weapon range of 3 or 4. Again, the travel distance of the persistence is not the trouble, but the weapon range itself, which will cause you to micro leap through cliffs and walls. And there you have it. While using this process to send a unit to dash with an ability is arguably a failure because it could currently be exploited to travel up and down cliffs, the weapon iteration is a little bit less likely to do so at the very least with a weapon range of 4 or less. And before I conclude the video, I wanted to showcase the wall contact finder validator on the projectile ability and the weapon launch projectile validator to see how this works. And there you have it. Now the fireball will be unable to fire through the wall, even if I could hypothetically travel further, which could hopefully give you some ideas for interesting things to create in the future. And the same goes for the weapon. The weapon will now stop at a wall, even though it can go further. It cannot pass through walls now. And there you have it for now. It really sucks that I could not find a better alternative for making sure that launching units with the ability or the weapon iteration could not be created without problems. Both of them will work without problem for aerial units without a validator or melee tag, but still. Hopefully you got something out of this video to help you make your own mods and maps for testing out on a PTR. Stay intact and have a nice day.